Hello everyone, today I will be talking about the true pagan origins of Lent, Ramadan and the origins of lunar cycles, along with Buddhism, Hinduism and global ancient mythologies. Without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? The date of the Great Lent in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, including the Greek Orthodox tradition, was tied to the phases of the moon. The timing of Lent is directly linked to the date of Pascha, Orthodox Easter, which is determined by the first full moon after the spring equinox. The First Ecumenical Council, Nicaea 325, decreed that Pascha should be the first Sunday after the first full moon falling on or immediately after the spring equinox. This ensures that Pascha is celebrated after the spring equinox. In ancient Greece, the moon played a significant role in religious practices, especially in relation to fasting and festivals. The moon was seen as a powerful force, influencing fertility and marking the passage of time, and fasting periods were often linked to lunar cycles. The Greek link to the ancient Egyptians certainly recognized and revered the moon, though on the surface there's no strong evidence to suggest that they practiced fasting based on the lunar cycle as a religious or ritualistic practice. Their calendar was heavily influenced by the moon, and lunar cycles were important for determining festivals and even tracking time. However, fasting, as a form of abstaining from food or drink, was not explicitly linked to lunar phases in their religious practices, though some scholars posit a connection between lunar cycles and specific rituals. The ancient Egyptians' calendar was deeply intertwined with the moon, particularly the heliacal rising of Sothis, Sirius. They tracked the lunar cycle, using it to organize their calendar and even naming months based on lunar phases. Like most agricultural societies, the ancient Egyptians originally organized their calendar according to the cycles of the moon and the agricultural seasons, 3042. Most scholars agree that the Egyptian day began at dawn, before the rising of the sun, rather than sunrise. Both Muslims and some Buddhists observe fasts linked to the lunar cycle as well. Muslims use the lunar calendar to determine the start and end of Ramadan, the month-long fast. Some Buddhists also fast on new moon and full moon days, as well as other special days. Both Hindus and Buddhists often fast in accordance with the lunar calendar. Hindus frequently observe fasts on certain days of the month like Ekadasi, Pradosha, or Purnima, full moon. Buddhists also practice Upasatha, a period of fasting and spiritual observance, which is often aligned with the new and full moons. If we go back to the heritage of the ancient Egyptians, we find that they didn't specifically use lunar indications as a religious observance in the same way that some modern religions do. However, they did have a practice of fasting, often for religious or ritual purposes, and sometimes these fasts might be associated with lunar cycles or specific times of the year. For example, they may have fasted for 30 days annually. Some texts mention fasting for 2 days after the sighting of the new moon or for 30 days after 8 days of the month. Additionally, some groups, like the Manichaeans, had specific fasts tied to the movements of the sun and moon. Fasting is a religious practice. Fasting was a fundamental part of religious doctrine for ancient Egyptians, used to train the spirit and exercise self-restraint. This year for Catholics, Lent began on Ash Wednesday and ends on either Holy Thursday or Holy Saturday, depending on the denomination or tradition you follow, according to Christianity.com. This year, that's either Thursday, April 17th or Saturday, April 19th. The start of Lent is directly tied to lunar cycles, specifically the date of Easter, which is determined by the first full moon after the spring equinox. Lent begins on Ash Wednesday, which is 46 days before Easter, and Easter is always the Sunday following that first full moon. While the Bible doesn't explicitly mandate fasting on specific lunar cycles, while it does contain numerous instances of fasting for various reasons, including prayer, repentance, and devotion, it doesn't prescribe a lunar calendar-based fast. However, certain traditions, like the Hindu practice of fasting on the 11th day of the lunar cycle, Ekadashi, or the Islamic practice of fasting during Ramadan, which is linked to the lunar cycle, demonstrate the association of fasting with the lunar calendar in different religious contexts. But while the specific term Lent isn't used in the Bible, the fantasy of the 40-day period of fasting and preparation associated with Lent is said to be rooted in biblical narratives. The practice draws inspiration from Old Testament stories of Moses and Elijah fasting for 40 days, and most notably, from Jesus' 40-day fast in the desert before his ministry. There is no indication in religious texts that Moses, Elijah, or Jesus practiced fasting according to lunar cycles. While they all practiced fasting, the timing and duration of their fasts were not tied to the lunar phases. The 40-day fasts associated with them, including those of Moses and Elijah before receiving divine messages, and Jesus' 40-day fast in the wilderness, are understood as periods of spiritual preparation and focus, not linked to lunar cycles. Easter is originally the celebration of Ishtar, the Assyrian and Babylonian goddess of fertility and sex. The Bible supports the idea of fasting as a spiritual practice between a person and God, and it suggests that it can be practiced at any time. Fasting is understood as a voluntary abstention from food, sometimes drink, for a specific period and purpose, often for spiritual reasons. While it doesn't explicitly mandate that everyone must fast, it does encourage and offer examples of fasting as a spiritual practice. Fasting is presented as a way to seek God, mourn, and turn to Him, often in times of need or repentance. An example of this is Islam. While fasting is obligatory during the month of Ramadan, Muslims can also voluntarily fast on other days throughout the year. There are specific days and times that are encouraged or recommended for voluntary fasting, such as Mondays and Thursdays, certain days in the lunar calendar, and the month of Shaban before Ramadan. It is forbidden, haram, to fast on specific days, primarily those associated with the two Eid celebrations, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, and the 3 days following Eid al-Adha. It is also prohibited to fast on days of doubt, such as the day before Ramadan begins if the new moon has not been sighted. Additionally, fasting every day of the year is not permissible. Now you know the true origins of fasting and its links and pagan origins to lunar cycle. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." If you were blind, you would be without sin, but if for since you say we see, and neglect truth, your sin remains. Kabbalah is an ancient Jewish tradition of mystical interpretation of the Bible, first transmitted orally and using esoteric methods, including ciphers. It reached the height of its influence in the later Middle Ages and remains significant in Hasidism. In Kabbalah, lunar cycles and fasting are interwoven, with the moon influencing both spiritual practice and physical well-being. Kabbalists observe specific fasts, particularly during certain lunar phases and periods, to deepen spiritual introspection and atonement. Additionally, some Kabbalistic practices incorporate fasting on specific days of the lunar cycle, such as the 11th day, to align with the body's natural rhythms and facilitate cleansing. To hammer this point home, the word Kabbalah is not directly in the Bible. It's a Jewish mystical tradition that developed after the Hebrew Bible was finalized, though it draws upon and interprets the Bible's texts. Kabbalah provides a more esoteric understanding of God, the universe, and the human soul, incorporating concepts like reincarnation and the tree of life. Rosicrucianism, a spiritual movement, incorporates elements from various traditions, including Jewish mysticism. It's believed that Rosicrucian teachings include secret wisdom passed down from ancient times and draws on occultism, Hermeticism, and Christian Gnosticism. While Rosicrucianism doesn't identify as a religion, it draws on diverse religious origins, including Jewish mysticism. The Rosy Cross or Rose Croix is a symbol and concept that has significant ties to both Freemasonry and the Rosicrucian movement. It's a red rose on a cross, representing a blend of spiritual and physical realms. In Freemasonry, it's particularly associated with the 18th degree of the Scottish Rite, the Knight of the Rose Croix, which explores themes of spirituality, philosophy, and ethics. The Rosicrucian movement, with its roots in 17th century Germany, also uses the Rosy Cross as a central symbol, emphasizing study, healing, and the pursuit of knowledge. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Teachers of the law, you give a tenth of your spices, you live by the letter of the law but neglect the more important heart of the law, justice, mercy and faithfulness. Here is wisdom. Philippians 3:19. Their destiny is destruction, their God is their stomach and their glory in their disgrace. They take pride in what should bring shame. Their minds are set on earthly things. According to Wikipedia, Freemasons utilize a combination of hand signals, foot positions, and verbal phrases as a means of recognition and identification within their rituals and gatherings. These are known as signs, steps, and tokens. Signs are specific hand gestures, while steps refer to the position of the feet, and tokens are unique handshakes. These signals are used to identify legitimate Freemasons and differentiate them from those who are not. A troublemaker and a villain, who goes about with a corrupt mouth, who winks maliciously with his eye, signals with his feet and motions with his fingers, who plots evil with deceit in his heart, he always stirs up conflict. Therefore disaster will overtake him in an instant, he will suddenly be destroyed.